Senator Natale.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. Now, for those people who are following this debate and aren't clear about what it involves, it's worth explaining it in a little bit of detail. This bill that's before the Parliament is an omnibus bill. Now, those people who have not heard that term before, if you're listening in, an omnibus bill deals with a whole range of seemingly disconnected acts of Parliament and looks to cobble together a whole range of different legislative amendments and puts it in the form of one piece of legislation. So what we've got is an omnibus bill that deals with things like supports for people with disabilities, deals with issues around single parents, deals with issues around young people. But I think of this bill not as an omnibus but as an omni-bulldozer, because it just sends a bulldozer through the rights and supports of people with disabilities, of single parents and young people. And there's one thing, I want to focus on one issue in particular, and that is the issue of the supports provided to people who are seeking to get an education. And this is something the National Party should be most interested in. If you live in a regional or rural community, as I do, getting an education often means packing up, leaving your local community and moving to a big city, finding accommodation and meeting all the expenses associated with accessing an education that is far removed from the place that you lived. In fact, it's a really important support for those people in my community, and what we're doing is we're effectively ripping out 500 million people. I'll take that interjection. The people of the southwest of Victoria would be offended if they were compared with people living in an urban community. I live on a 50-acre property in the Otways, in a small community called Deans Marsh of 2,000 residents in between Colac and the coastal town of Lorne. That is a rural community, and there are people who live in my community who rely on these supports, who rely on them.
Order on my right.
What we're seeing is $500 million being ripped out. The great tragedy here is not that the Liberal Party has proposed this change, because after the last budget, nothing could surprise me about the cruelty that could be inflicted on the poor, the sick, the elderly, the vulnerable by the coalition. But what the great surprise here, in fact the great tragedy is, we've got the once proud Labor Party who stood up for the rights of the poor, the sick, the vulnerable, the young, now doing a grubby deal with the Liberal Party in a back room and ramming these changes through. This was the party who stood up and said, we will stand against this cruel budget, we will fight against Abbott's changes to education, to healthcare and so on, and now they've done a deal with
Prime
them.
Minister
They
Abbott,
have done a grubby deal with the Liberal Party. This is the party who attends rallies, who stands up with megaphones saying, we're going to stop this budget, and now what we're hearing is a deal done between both parties to ensure that young people no longer have access to support to get an education. And consider it in the context of the broader education changes, where a higher education degree is now out of reach. It represents everything that's rotten with politics. We get the rhetoric and we get the action. And the rhetoric and the action, they very, very rarely come together. So what we've got is we've got the rhetoric of this cruel and harsh budget, the Labor Party standing up against it, and now we've got a backroom deal between the Labor Party and the coalition saying, let's just keep this quiet, let's remove supports from young people, from single parents, from people with disabilities, and let's ensure that those people who need those supports no longer have them. Why? I don't know. You've got to ask the question of the Labor Party, why on earth would you, at this time when we're seeing the harshest attack on the Australian community ever witnessed by a coalition government, taking on pensioners, taking on people with disabilities, taking on single parents, taking on young people, would you capitulate and support these changes? Why would you do it? I don't get it. It makes no sense. The only context in which someone can understand it is that there has been a grubby deal struck, that there's more to this, and that in fact what we've got is once again the Australian community being sold out in the name of grubby politics.